Well, good morning. Thanks for coming back. I'm sorry about the crush, but there's nothing we can do about it. So, today, am I getting anything? I am. Today, it's pretty much the same story as last year. I'm going to talk to you about what I do with Vim. So, it's basically Vim in the hands of a maniac. I want to give you some useful ideas, some useful tricks that are going to make your everyday Vim editing very much better. But I wanted to start out with a completely useless trick that will in no way improve your Vim editing. I wrote a plugin this year called SWTC, and I wanted to start off just by showing that to you. This plugin does this. We're still in Vim. So the really nice thing about this thank you, is that it's all entirely data-driven. And if you grab this module, which you're going to be able to grab, you can basically just write your own episodes as well. Now, everything else today, I hope, is going to be much more useful from that, and you can download it from this place, is.gd/IBV2013. I'll show that again at the end, so if you don't get it now, you can get it later. It's a tarball with every bit of software I'm going to show you today and a copy of all the slides, so you don't have to frantically write stuff down that you're interested in. These are the things I want to talk about today. 4 different sections, 12 different ideas. The first of them has to do with screen width. Now, I don't know about you, but I like to always code only to 80 columns. But that's kind of annoying because it means that just occasionally you need to wrap something. So I prefer if I can just occasionally slop over without there being a problem. So here, for example, is the source code of that plugin that I saw, and you can see that just occasionally there's a line that runs a little bit long. But when I'm doing that, I'd like to know when I'm doing that, when I'm actually going over the boundary. So Vim has a wonderful option for that. It's the color column option. If you set color column and then give it a number, or in fact you can give it several numbers separated by commas, then it does this. It basically just puts some coloring on that particular column. So immediately you can tell when you're slopping over. The only problem with that is I find that column being there permanently to be just annoying. What I'd really like is something a little bit different. So I did this instead. Instead of using the color column built in, I used a function built into Vim called match add. And you just give it a regex. Here the regex is you are at the 81st column, virtually, and you give it a color to make things, and then it does this. And now you notice that the only lines that have the little marker on them are the lines that actually go over. So I'm not distracted by it, but I always get a warning when I'm going over my boundaries. If you like to do that as well, then it's useful. The other thing about color column is even if you don't use it for good, you can use it for evil. If you set something like this, because you can set multiple color columns, on April Fool's next year, you can bury this in their vimrec file, and then whenever they edit, it will look like this. And they will have a lot of fun. And the thing to do is make a conspiracy with everyone else not to notice it. And I say, my Vim's doing this. Doing what? So, color column. One of the commands that I use more often than anything else, I think, is the N command. That's the thing that takes you to the next match. You do a search, and then N takes you to the next match and the next match. But I like to use the HL search option, and that's the option that highlights everything that would have matched your search. And that can create problems when I'm going from match to match. So here's some text. If I search for you, then I get a lot of matches, and they all get highlighted. Now, as I go next to next to next, can you see how hard it is to see where the cursor is? That's not really helpful to me. So I thought maybe Vim ought to have an HL next as well, that somehow highlights the next one that you went to slightly differently, at least temporarily. So I built myself that by remapping N and capital N to do this. Initially it was just a very simple thing, which is invert the current line of the cursor and then wait a second and then invert it again. And when you do that, at least it tells you which line you are on. So it draws your eye a little bit. That still wasn't quite good enough for me, so I just started excessively working through this. These are all in the table. You don't have to even think about what these do. And I went through all kinds of things. Put a ring around it. That's kind of nice. And then I went exactly the opposite direction, and I really want you to draw my eye to it, so hide everything else. Watch this. No way you aren't going to see where that is. And then I dialed it back a little bit, and the one that I'm working with now just kind of highlights it by blinking at you. So they're all in the tarball, and you can download it and just adjust it to whatever you want. Kind of a cool little trick. The next thing I want to talk about is white space in code. I'm really obsessive about white space. I do not use tab characters. I've always got expand tabs turned on. I don't like other kinds of weird non-breaking spaces in it. And I do not like trailing white space at the end of the line. So when I have a file like this, I don't want there to be tabs in it. And I sure as heck don't want there to be a whole lot of white space at the end of the line. So how can I tell that that's happening in my files? Well, Vim has a couple of options that let you do that. The list and list chars option. The list chars option lets you specify how you want tabs and non-breaking spaces and trailing white space to be represented. And then turning on the list option makes Vim actually do that. So you turn those two options on, and now exactly the same file has little markers in it to tell you when you've got characters that you don't want to see. And that can help you get rid of them. Now, personally, I like to use Unicode characters because they look different from the normal stuff that I type, and it's easier to say, okay, that's something a bit special. So mine kind of look like that. But the lovely thing about it is you can have whatever you want there. And you can turn some of them on or not other ones on that you don't care about. You know, if you use tabs, you certainly don't want to have the tabs highlighted all the time because that's just annoying. So anyway, list and list chars as options. The second set of ideas that I've got for you have to do with laziness. And I'm really big on laziness. That's why I don't use Emacs. Can't be doing that many characters at a time. So one of the things I like about Vim over Emacs is it doesn't have a lot of these awkward key chords. I can generally just hit one key and get some useful action out of it. With one important exception. The most annoying one is shift semicolon, otherwise known as colon. Okay, I don't know about you, but I use colon commands all the time, and it's just really annoying to have to roll over two keys to get to it. Especially given that semicolon isn't doing anything particularly interesting anyway. How many people know what semicolon does? Yeah, exactly. So, simple and obvious thing. Just remap semicolon that doesn't require a shift to colon. Now, your old colon will continue to work if you do happen to shift it, but now you can just hit one key and get yourself into a colon command. Or if you are one of the 5 people in the room, and apparently the 5 people in the entire planet that does use that semicolon, you can just no remap the two to each other. You've got to say no remap, otherwise you're mapping A to B and B to A, and it will just forever. But if you no remap it, it'll just swap them around. Now, that's a trick you can use for lots of things. If you've got two keystrokes that you don't like, or one is more useful to you than the other, you can just swap them around with a pair of N no remaps. Diffs. I do an enormous amount of patching and diffing and dealing with bug reports and so forth, but I'm not a fan of syntax colouring. I don't know, how many people here like syntax colouring? Yeah, it's always the majority. I just don't understand it. For me, it's just a distraction. It's just kind of, oh my God, the colours are everywhere. What am I doing there? That's the standard syntax colouring for Vim script. Man, not helpful. But occasionally, syntax colouring does help. So if, like me, you have it turned off, sometimes it's useful to turn it on. And diffs and patch files are a great example of that. Because diffs consist of meta information, where did this come from, and then commands, take this out or put this in, and then context around it. And it's really hard, if it's all white, to tell which is which. It all just looks the same. So if you don't like syntax highlighting for most things, you might want to think about setting up an auto command like this, where you say, look, if it's a patch or a reg or a diff file, just turn the syntax highlighting on for that. Or if you prefer it to do it with the file type mechanism, you can just say, look, when the file type is a diff, whatever its extension is, then I want you to turn on the syntax highlighting. And then if we go back with that, you can see this is actually useful. All the meta stuff is in green. The things that are coming out are in red. The things that are going in are in blue. And that just makes it much, much easier to see. So even if you aren't a regular user of syntax colouring, think about setting yourself up some auto commands that will do that for you when it makes sense to do it for you. The way I tend to use Vim, and the way I tend to use my terminal, is to have lots of separate terminal windows. I'm not a big user of Screen or Tmux or something like that. I prefer to have separate windows all the time. And the problem with having separate windows all the time is that I will forget that I'm already editing a particular file in another. Is that something that other people have? Yeah. So what do you get when you do that? You get this all the time. Voomp. Oh, I've seen you've got a swap file active. What do you want to do at this point? And basically, none of the options are good enough. And that's my problem. What I discovered was I only ever do two things. The first thing I do is quit immediately and then go searching through my terminal windows for where the damn session actually is. Or if I know there is no session, then this must be like an orphan swap file from a previous crash. Then I tend to use O to open it up read-only so I don't accidentally modify it before I have a chance to look at it and recover it. So one of the things you can do in Vim is every time it detects a swap file, it brings up a swap exists event. So you can auto-command to say, if you get a swap exists event on any kind of file, then just set this particular variable that's internal to Vim. The swap choice variable says, I am always going to make the choice O, so don't bother showing me all of that crap. Just assume that I typed O and get me in there read-only. And so I set that up and it was really handy, but after a little while I forgot that it was doing that, and I'd start editing the damn file, and at the end of it I'd go to write, and of course it was read-only. So I added in a little bit of extra activity which just says, look, tell me that it's doing that, so I know that this is what's happening. So that worked pretty well for a while, and if I wanted the other, which was quit, then I was in the file, I'd just ZZ, which is like a reflex to me, and I'd be out and I'd be hunting for my remainder of my session. But that's what I found I was doing most of the time. I'd edit a file, it'd say duplicate session, I'd ZZ, and then I'd start flicking through on the keyboard each of my terminal windows, trying to find the appropriate one that had a session. And as soon as I find myself doing that, there's no way I'm putting up with that. I'm a programmer, goddammit. That's what I'm good at, automating this rubbish. Or worse still, it'd be an orphaned swap file, so I'd get to the end of all of my windows and get really irritated and then just have to go and kill the swap file and edit again. So all of that sucks, so I wrote myself a plugin called Auto Swap Mac that just handles everything for me. Let me demo it for you. So if I'm going to edit, so let's go back to that file again. Now what happens if I create a second window? Here's a second window. And I edit the same file. Watch what happens now. It just flips me back into the terminal window that's the correct one. And the other terminal window, it just flipped me out of. It just automatically worked out where it should take me. That makes life like 1,000 times easier. And more importantly, it doesn't break my flow of concentration. Now, if I were to accidentally kill that session without saving it, now I have a swap file that is newer than what's on the file. So normally I would again get that, there's a swap file, what do you want to do about it? But this thing is smart enough so if I edit it, it does this. If you look down the bottom, it says swap file detected, I'm opening this read-only. It found a newer swap file, so it just opened it read-only. And indeed, it is read-only, it can't write. Now, if I did in fact overwrite it, now I have the situation where my file is newer than my swap file, which hasn't been deleted. Guess what? Same plugin, if you edit it again, detects that it's an older swap file and just deletes it for you automatically. And then the next time I edit, there's no swap file anymore, so I don't get any message at all. And that now handles everything that I want to do when I'm dealing with swap files in a safe and reliable way. And my life just got significantly better. Now, unfortunately, I only set it up to work on a Mac, and only with certain headings on the title so that you can find which session it's in. But it's in the tarball, and you're very, very welcome to mess around with it for your platform and your editing setup as well. The whole thing here is the idea. The third set of topics that I want to talk with you about a little bit have to do with the use of Vim when you are writing not code, but when you are writing language. Predominantly English, but I want to talk about other languages as well. So I write a lot of documentation in Vim. One thing that really annoys me is when I've been writing some documentation and describing the components that you need for something or the steps that you need to follow for something, and I've been writing it, and it's you do step A, comma, then step B, comma, then step C, comma, then step D. And at the point where I get to about step D, I realize, God damn it, this should have been a bulleted list. Because I've got too many points in a row and they're not going to be able to follow it. So I could go back and edit it and make it into a bulleted list, or I could get smart and write a plugin that does that for me. Guess which I did? So I got a plugin that you simply put yourself on the part of the text that has the comma-separated list. You hit one key and you have a bulleted list. Thank you. Oh, but it gets better. If you had a bulleted list and you realize, you know what, this really should just be a comma-separated list, you hit the same key, it auto-detects that it was a bulleted list and just turns it back to the ordinary one. And you can go back and forth, uncertain which one you want. Note too, that it knows English convention. So if you look at the very last point there, when it goes back to being another list, it adds an and in there. And an Oxford comma. Thank you. Now, one of the issues with this is that there are other conventions as well, because if one of your bullets already has a comma in it, you can't just turn it into a comma-separated list because that's going to change the meaning. So what do we do in English if there's already a comma in one of our options? Semicolons. Hit the same key and now it comes back with semicolons. Note that when there's an and at the end here, when we go to it being a list, it just removes the and because it's superfluous there. However, if it wasn't an and, if it was some other kind of conjunction, it knows to keep it. and put it on the end of the penultimate option. And then when you go back again, it rearranges it and puts it after the final Oxford comma. It's pretty damn smart. So you don't have to worry about lists anymore. You can just swap them back and forth. It also has a binding for visual mode. So you can just visually select a bit of it and get that turned into a list if you want to. The plugin's called ListTrans. Guess what? It's in the tarball. One of the things I really, really like about Vim is that I can use it anywhere in the world. So quite a few of my clients, when I'm teaching Vim or other things, don't actually speak English very well in all kinds of parts of the world. And so what I want to do for them is stick to the subset of English that's known as basic English. It's just a couple of thousand words that are the common words in English. But the problem is that when you write a slide like this, how do you know which words are okay and which are not? So what I did was I created a new spelling list that only had the words of basic English in it. And I created some mappings that allow me to turn it on. And when I turn it on, then all of the correctly spelled English words that are not in the basic English subset get highlighted as errors. And I can just go through and replace them with words that are acceptable and that simply removes the highlighting from them. This is the standard spell checker that's in Vim 7. So I'm not doing anything special. The only thing I did was make my own spelling dictionary. And of course I've got a mapping to turn it back off again when I'm happy with it. The way you make your own spelling dictionary is with a built-in called MakeSpell. You tell it where you want it to put it, and you better put it in your .vim subdirectory so it can find it again. And then you just give it a file in which each word is on its own line, just in like the standard user-shared dict. But the great thing is you can choose whatever you want. So it might not be that you need to use basic English, but it might be that there are certain words that you are not allowed to use in your documentation for legal reasons. Well, you could just copy the standard dictionary across, remove those words, make up a dictionary like that, and just switch into it. And then any time that you used one of those words, it would come up red. I kind of find that very handy. The other thing I love about Vim is you're not restricted to ASCII with Vim. I really like it that if I want to say no hablo mucho inglés, I can do it with the correct punctuation using Latin 1 and in some cases Unicode characters. The only problem with that is that the way that you have to put those characters in is with digraphs. And I can never remember the digraph code for anything. I don't know why it is, it just doesn't work for me. So here's my workflow when I'm doing digraphs. I get to the point where I need to put an O acute in. And I do Control K and then I stop. I know it's an O. How do I get the acute? And so what I do is in the end, I say some rude words. Not very rude words. I double escape out of the Control K and out of the insert mode. I do semicolon digraph. I hunt through the list of all the digraphs, finding the one that I want, memorize it, come back, go into insert mode again, Control K, and then type it in. It's actually O apostrophe. And then I get my O acute. And pretty much every damn time, I'm going to have to do that. So there's no way I'm doing that. My first idea was, why don't I just remap Control K so that it automatically, temporarily jumps out of insert mode with a Control O, does a digraphs command, and then jumps back in and types in the Control K for me. That'd be cool. Unfortunately, it's way too cool. Because you do that, it jumps out, shows the digraphs, then jumps immediately back in, which wipes the digraphs off. And your visual acuity has to be extraordinary to do that in time. So what I did was I rewrote it into a function. I said, I'm going to overload it so that whenever I do Control K, it calls this function. And what's the function going to do? the function's going to call digraphs, and then the cunning bit is, and then it's going to call getChar. It's going to throw away the character it gets, but it's going to sit there and wait till I type something. And then it's going to return a control K, and because it's an expression mapping, that control K will become what it actually does. So when you do that, you end up with this. I'm in insert mode, I do a control K, I find what I want, I hit my character to return, and just type it in. And I was really happy with that for about 10 seconds. Because it kept interrupting my flow. It'd fill the screen with digraphs, and I'd lose context of where I was. What I realized that what I wanted was, in fact, a heads-up display of digraphs. And I wanted help in narrowing down the choices that I had to make, because it's still a hunt and peck. So I wrote a plugin. Surprise, surprise. And with that plugin, when I do a control K, this happens. Note that the line where I'm typing is still there, so I don't lose context, and I got a low visibility version of the different characters that I might want to type. Now I know it's an O acute, so when I type O, watch what happens. Yeah? It strips out the ones that I don't want, and I can look for the acute symbol and just type the one that I want. Oh, I missed it. Hang on, let me do it again. O acute. Thank you. So that was great, but that highlighted the real problem for me, which is if I could just remember the damn digraphs, I wouldn't need this assistance. And the mnemonics for them are terrible. They're great for Bram. For the rest of us, who knows? So since they suck, I wrote another version of this module with sequences that make sense. And what makes sense to me is if I want O acute, I should type OA. If I want O tilde, OT. If I want C cedilla, CC. So that's what I did. So my final version now looks like this. Control K, O, and an A will give me acute. O tilde. C cedilla. And I'm now thinking about maybe I should just delay the heads up, give myself half a second to actually type it in, and if I don't get there in time, then have the heads up come up. Haven't got that yet, but this is in the tarball. Both versions are in the tarball. Whether you want standard vanilla digraphs or the specialty digraphs, they're both there and you can just choose yourself. And frankly, the arrangement of the how do we map the digraphs is so simple in the actual plugin that if you didn't like my choices, it'd be a very simple matter to go in and edit and change them to your choices. Final section of things I want to talk about have to do with my very favorite tool in Vim, and that is the visual modes. Who loves the visual modes, visual block mode? If you don't know what these are the modes that allow you to hit a key, V or capital V or control V, and then select a region of text which gets highlighted, and then once you've got the text selected, then apply an action to it. It's a fantastic way of doing things, but it's not perfect. So I want to make it perfect. Something I find myself doing remarkably often is pulling up a scratch buffer and just typing in some numbers. Someone's feeding me information about something, or I'm looking it up in a book or something, and I want to get the whole list of numbers, and in the end, I'm going to want to add them up. I don't want to do it in an on-screen calculator. I hate on-screen calculators because you get halfway through and you can't remember how many of the numbers you've put in. And I certainly don't want to pull up a full spreadsheet. Even the spreadsheet that you can get for Vim isn't going to do it for me. All I want is type in a column of numbers and then add it up. How hard would that be? Well, it was surprisingly hard, but guess what I did? Yeah, I wrote a plugin to do that. It sums, averages, dices, slices, you name it. So I've typed in a whole lot of numbers, And now I just hit plus, because that's what I mapped it to. And down the bottom, you can see the sum, the average, the minimum, the maximum. And yes, the average is done with the correct mathematical approximation, so you don't get too many decimal places to it. Instead of doing it just like that, you can do it actually in visual block mode. So if you just highlight, say, the integers and double plus it, then you get the sum of just the integers like that. And because you're averaging integers, you can use more decimal places because they're precise. And it's smart. So if you do something like this, and you've got things that are not numbers in it, it just sucks the numbers out of them and adds them up for you. And it's really smart because if you have things that look like numbers which are clearly not numbers, it doesn't add them into the average. So if I do it again, you get exactly the same average. And of course, that was great. That was very helpful. But what do I want to do now that I've got those numbers? I want to put them in somewhere. I want to type them in somewhere. So you'll notice down the bottom, it says sum, average, min, and max. And one of the letters is underlined. That's the yank buffer that has that value in it now. So if I get that information, then I can just literally say, from S, put, from A, put. Now, I don't know about you, but this is something that I do surprisingly often, and my life got better once I worked out how to do it easily. Plugin's called VMath. It's in the table. Yeah, you're not sure what this one's going to be about. I really love visual block mode. I love being able to select a column of something and do something with it. The only problem is visual blocks don't always act like visual blocks, and then they're worse than useless. So here's a table, and there's a visual block selection. And what I'd like to do is sort those things alphabetically. So I go colon, sort, what's going to happen? That's going to happen. Whenever you do a colon command on a visual block, the colon command applies to the entire lines that the block spans, not just to the text that the block is highlighting. So I didn't end up with my key characters in alphabetical order. I ended up with my sequence numbers because they were the sortable thing at the start of each line. Very annoying. Fortunately, guess what? There's a module. I didn't write this one. I thought I should show you something else that someone did. And this module, again, you do a block selection, you do colon, and then you type the capital B, meaning apply this only to the actual block. And you do your sort then, and lo and behold, it does just sort the data in the actual block. And any command that you could do as a colon command will only be applied to the actual text in the block. This makes it so much useful. I'm nearly at the point where I'm remapping colon in visual mode to be colon B, because it's just so much more useful. So that's provided by a plugin called viz.vim. It isn't in the tarball, but the URL for it is in the PDF that's in the tarball, so you can find it. The last tool, and this is the favorite thing that I've done all year with Vim scripting, is actually kind of a viewer submission. After my Vim talk last year, Steve Matney came up afterwards. Is Steve in the room? Are you here, Steve? Obviously not. He's done his good work and he's left our planet. And he showed me a couple of mappings that he had set up in visual mode that helped him move visual mode data around. And they're fairly weird looking mappings. And I'm not going to go into the details of them because it's not important, because I took these and I thought, you know what, they're great, but they've got some nasty edge cases and they don't quite do what I want as easily as I want. So I wrote a plugin that did exactly what I want and added in all kinds of other cosmic powers. And it's just much easier to demonstrate to you what this does, because as soon as you see it, you'll get the idea. So suppose we select a column here. Watch this. Who's experiencing lust at the moment? Good. That's what I want you to do. And it works either on visual blocks or entire visual lines. Them, of course, you can only move up and down. Your life will never be the same. I use this for all kinds of things. So you remember, this was the data format for that stupid thing at the beginning. And you'll write something like this and you'll realize, oh, damn, that Vim is like off by one character. Well, guess what? Block select it, move it across by one character. Nothing else moves. If you don't grab the tarball for any other reason, grab it for that. But that's not even my favorite thing that it does. It just exports one function that you can call, and I mapped it just to my left, right, up, and down because it seemed natural for me to do that. But it has one other tool that's actually even more useful to me, and it's a function called duplicate. And what this does is it lets you select a visual block, and then you type capital D, and you get a draggable copy of it. And then you do this, and then you do that, and you're done. So, you know where it is. It's in the tarball. I know there are some Vim masters and mistresses in this room, but it doesn't matter how well you know Vim. There's always another option to pick up on. And there's always some behavior that you can re-script and make it more convenient to your workflow. There's always something you can borg from somebody else. And the reason for that is simple, because editing is annoyance. The editor doesn't work, unless you are Bram Mulliner, it doesn't work exactly the way you wanted it to. But guess what? You can make it work the way you want it to. Grab the tarball, that's the URL again. My entire Vim rec is up on GitHub if you want to go trawling for other goodies and evils. Try some of these things out. If you're good enough, adapt them to your own needs. Thank you very, very much. Have a great OSCON. Oh, and by the way, I teach this kind of stuff. Get in touch with me if you want to know more. Thank you.